Don't gasp as I say this, but Super Mario Galaxy is a surprisingly normal game. Yes, I played the game you are watching on the screen and thought this actually isn't all that weird, at least from the perspective of other Mario games, that is. I've said a while back in a video nobody watched that Mario thrives when he's in the most insane settings known to man, and Galaxy does take place in the least hospitable area you can reach, the vacuum of space. But despite outer space being conceptually out of left field when compared to the Mushroom Kingdom or the town of Bridgeport, it's in the way these games utilize their settings that make them feel normal. While Galaxy has a severe setting, it coats the setting in a mostly serious tone. Compare this with Thousand Year Door, where the presentation makes the gameplay feel way larger than life. Both of these have distinct stylistic choices, but they go in opposite directions, achieving two tonally distinct takes on Mario's adventures, with the choices having the inverse effect of their settings. Anyways, both of these games are amazing, so... Motion controls are probably the most inconsistent part of Super Mario Galaxy, so you have to make your motion controls have the same responsiveness as a button press in order to get them to work properly. Yeah, no, says the rolling ball. This is a mechanic that absolutely shouldn't work. Multiple different motion control methods have been absolutely horrible, and yet the rolling ball is so terribly controlled that it's amazing. Its very quick acceleration and janky deceleration lead to so many moments where you just barely avoid flying off the edge of the map. Having many levels incorporate enemies that pop you into the air just adds to the spontaneity in the gameplay. I've played through Rolling Green Galaxy dozens of times and I still feel an adrenaline rush every time I come back from falling to my death. And I can see how people would be frustrated by this game mechanic, similarly to how people really despise the spring mushroom. But much like the spring mushroom, I would take this volatile and janky movement any day over the slow and drawn out movement of something like the bee mushroom, which is definitely not a popular opinion to have because Super Mario Galaxy fans are often mystified by the fact that the red star didn't return in Galaxy 2. And I think it does really make perfect sense to me. For starters, designing a simple level where you can literally go anywhere takes ages to make, and a complex level would take even longer. This is why the two areas where you use the red star in Galaxy 1 are an area that is basically just 3 platforms, and a level that is just a giant ball. But putting a lot of effort into a level should be worth it for a good game mechanic, and that's just it. For a good game mechanic. The red star's movement is pretty similar to a style of movement that I am not too fond of. Much like swimming, the red star has a problem of a randomly moving camera and unresponsive controls. It does have the benefit of being more consistent when moving across all 3 axes when compared with swimming, but it still lacks the sharp and volatile movement Galaxy is known for. And while we lost this power-up that gave us basically free range over the map, we gained a power-up that does the exact same thing while actually being fun to control, and that is a trade that I will gladly take. So it's somewhat odd that I was scrolling through this YouTube inspiration tab thing while I was writing a different video and came across these AI-generated ideas. These cover the intriguing 2D Mario controversy that doesn't exist and the Bouldergeist video that I already made, but maybe having an artificial intelligence think for me is actually better than thinking for myself. So let's try Micro Goomba. Is it a hazardous orange? Okay, for starters, I'm assuming this is referring to how in my most popular video I do call the Goomba a hazardous orange, despite the Goomba clearly being brown. Now in most appearances he is actually a mild brown, but in Galaxy a lot of the levels have lighting that makes him appear orange. But I can see how this is misleading to even people who regularly play through these games. But how did this mismatch happen? Well, the truth is that I make a lot of these videos on a tight schedule, and they all have to be around a minute long. So about 99% of the time I end up leaving out information in these videos or don't get my point across in the way I wanted to. This isn't an exaggeration. There are maybe 1 or 2 shorts that I truly consider resume material in terms of their written content, not in terms of their editing. And also, I'm never using this AI stuff again because yesterday, I've known for the longest time that Thousand Year Door is a very popular pick for the best Paper Mario game of all time, but I still never really got around to playing it. I had played Sticker Star and basically expected Thousand Year Door to be a tighter Sticker Star, and having played both now, I can say with confidence I had no idea Thousand Year Door was that much better. I don't think you even need to look further than the battle mechanics themselves. Thousand Year Door places so much emphasis on the theatrics of the Paper Mario franchise. Having a literal crowd cheering you on is one thing, but having multiple different ways of interacting with the crowd is a whole new level of dynamic gameplay that makes all of the battles feel fresh. And that's not even mentioning when the game gets really weird with it and starts messing around with the battle area itself. This continual dedication to going above and beyond in the battle mode is also reflective of every other part of Thousand Year Door. The writing, the gameplay, the environments, and so much more keep going above and beyond every time it gets the chance. I seriously recommend you give this game a try since Thousand Year Door's battles are a perfect blend of fast-paced reactions and critical strategy gameplay. But what if we went even further with these fast-paced mechanics? And oh, what the heck? FNAF World was a game that was considered so bad at its release that the creator literally pulled it from Steam and made the game completely free. And I've got to say that this debilitating release completely parallels the gameplay itself. The quote-unquote turn-based mechanics this game employs are so quick and visually saturated that the battles in this game feel incorrectly put together. This is probably the only game where losing your mouse on the screen is considered a game mechanic, and I love it for that. Sugar-coated insanity is the best way of quantifying the game, with its enemies being straight out of shovelware and its plot being perplexing at best. You don't even need to look further than how this game treats itself in its visuals and storytelling. The main guide of the game literally makes most fun of the game itself as you play. Of course, it's not on the same tier as an actual turn-based fighting game like Paper Mario or Pokemon, but I do think this one is fun to return to every once in a while. But don't get me wrong, I still prefer how. I think of all the words you can use to describe the various Mario enemies, the word creepy rarely ever comes up. And when it does, it's never for the intended reason. I'm talking about the flip bug. At face value, this guy is the definition of pathetic. Runs away from Mario, meaning that the only way you can get hurt is through your own negligence. But where the flip bug really gets creepy is when you transform into B Mario. The second you turn into the insect, the flip bugs do a 180 and begin to chase down Mario. And enemies chasing Mario is nothing new, but it's how the flip bugs move towards Mario that is very eerie. Whereas most enemies move towards Mario with a jaunty gait, the flip bugs move towards Mario without moving anything other than their wings. The flip bug's unwavering focus on Mario makes me feel like I'm a kid playing outside again, and I have to avoid getting stung at every corner. Maybe I actually see why I don't like the B power-up much. Anyways, I've done my fair share of dunking on purple coin missions, but you can make these missions work if you actually think through the level design. So here's my list of steps to make a good purple coin level. 1. Introduce the player to a new area. This at very least makes the purple coin missions feel less repetitive. If it isn't a new area, at least use an area that the player spent very little time in. 2. Make the purple coin missions linear. The genius of interesting level design is the fact that people will naturally explore your levels. This is enjoyable level design, but to extract that good level design, you need to allow the player to explore it on their own. Forcing the player to explore the area removes any intrigue the player might have. 3. Make it interesting. Incorporate the purple coins in a way that hasn't been done before. One of the most interesting purple coin levels in the whole series utilizes pole stars, which are all over this game, and just doing that is enough to make it one of the best stars in the Galaxy series. If you follow these 3 steps, the purple coin levels should at least be playable, or if you're lucky, somewhat enjoyable. But this is uncommon, which is exactly why a game's ability to maintain momentum is mission critical to its success. Oh, right. Lore is packed into almost every game you play. Unless you're playing Adventure on the Atari 2600, each game has some amount of story to it. But in some games, story can be encouraging, and in others, it can be debilitating. So what causes the difference? Let's start with the negative impacts of lore. The Pokemon series. I have no problem with the story in most Pokemon games on its own, and I actually do find it to be quite interesting. My problem is in how it's thrust onto the player. Much like exploration in your levels, lore should be a reward for intrigue, not a requirement. Forcing a player to go through the lore of the game limits player agency and turns you from a player into a spectator. But how does a game like Super Mario Galaxy avoid this despite still having a story forced onto the player? The answer is in the dosage. Mario's story can be portrayed with minimal text and minimal time, keeping most players pretty happy. But in modern Pokemon games, you're pushing past the LD50 on information, overcrowding your average player's brain, the same brain which is trying to get adjusted to your game as a whole. So by keeping it short and sweet, you almost make the lore easier to digest and grow intrigue for the story naturally. This directly impacts how the Paragoomba, the Jackal Goomba, and the Goom Beetle all have one thing in common. They're just a Goomba with different hats. While the hats do lead to the Goombas having different mechanics, it's the focus on the headgear that gives us insight into their designs. Think about it, a lot of Mario titles have recurring enemies that are given recolors or redesigns to fit a specific area, or are just straight up given counterparts that are also present in a ton of levels. Not the Goomba though. Well, obviously they're all over the game, but instead I mean in terms of their variants. These variants are just the regular Goomba but with wings, a tail, or a pumpkin covering their face. Now, this may come off as lazy, but I think it's more accurately described as fitting. What the developers are non-verbally communicating with the player is that the Goomba variants are less than their redesigned counterparts, which makes sense as the Goombas are the grunts of King Koopa's army, so you end up focusing less on the Goomba's variants as a reflection of the focus put into their designs, so they're poorly designed on purpose. Well, the good thing is, the modern Mario games are perfected platformers that are smoothly controlled in the hands of the player. But is this a new phenomena, or has Mario always been like this? After going back and playing the original Mario Bros for the NES, I can say with confidence, yeah, it's a new thing. To be fair, the original Mario Bros controls aren't horrible, and these controls seem to be this way to give the player a challenge, but Mario is just too slippery in this game. Additionally, a lot of Mario's spontaneity is limited to the Y-axis rather than the X-axis in modern Mario games, meaning that if you want to move quicker, your only option is to have Mario wind up like a Matchbox car. That is, a Matchbox car on a floor that's constantly falling apart. Mario has the Euclidean consistency of King Boo, with him always phasing through the platformers every time you jump. There's definitely a reason why a lot of people look to this game's Super upgrade as the real starter of the Mario series, and not this frictionless arcade game. But that still doesn't change the fact that, much like an eccentric 8-year-old entering a zoo, I can't help but ask, where are the turtles? Seriously, the Koopas are notably absent from Super Mario Galaxy, but how does a staple of the Mario franchise end up absent from one of the grandest adventures in Mario's history? For starters, the Koopas give Mario access to the Koopa Shell, which would likely invalidate a lot of the level design and enemy placement Galaxy already has. But why doesn't the Koopa Shell just fly around like in the 2D Mario games? Yet again, it's because of the 3 dimensions. In the few occurrences where the shells do act like this, they're extremely uncontrollable, which works in the context of Kamella's boss fight, but would fail for a lot of other levels, and an uncontrollable shell is completely useless when most enemies can be knocked out with a comparatively controllable spin attack. Even in Thousand Year Door, the Koopa shell is confined to 2 axes because that's where it works best. Moving it in 3 dimensions would make it so uncontrollable you might as well just not bother. But anyways, why are there so many Thwomp variants? It's actually kind of hard to notice unless you've played through a lot of Mario games, but there are a ton of Thwomps, ranging from the minute cinder blocks like the Wimp to the giant romps that chase you down in Slip Sand Galaxy. Such a diverse pool of enemies is quite odd, especially when you compare it with the other variants of enemies that don't change much. But to answer the question of why are there so many Thwomp variants, we have to go back 3 sentences when I said it's actually kind of hard to notice. Many of the areas in the Mario games incorporate the stone castle or dungeon themes that Thwomp variants can nest comfortably in. They don't stick out like a sore thumb, and that's for a reason. Oh, okay, well that actually is. The Thwomp variants are built to be widely applicable across multiple levels, so it actually kind of makes sense that there are so many, and uniting these under the Thwomp name makes it a lot easier to recognize them when they show up. Like, if I see this in a level, I have no idea what it does, but if I know that's a Gromp, I can go, oh, like a Thwomp but sideways. Or maybe it's just because the names sound cool. I mean, that would answer the question. One of the weirdest phenomena I've noticed across the Super Mario Galaxy franchise is the tendency for Nintendo to change the names of characters between the Galaxy games. Enemies like Electro Goombas are changed to Octoguys for no apparent reason. So why is Nintendo so afraid of nominal consistency? It's no secret the Galaxy 2 takes itself a lot less seriously than Super Mario Galaxy 1. Not that Galaxy 2 doesn't have any stakes, just that it's not as story focused. This focus on seriousness makes Mario Galaxy 1 seem a lot more terrified to make a mistake in their level design. And while this is very apparent in gameplay like I've discussed before, this is also apparent in the names of enemies themselves. When Galaxy 2 ended up coming around, a lot of the quote-unquote serious names were transformed to be goofy. Astro Goombas sound like an interstellar threat in Galaxy 1, but Goom Beetles are just Goombas with helmets, I guess. I think the naming convention just perfectly represents how both games treat themselves. One is a lot more severe, and the other one is a bit apathetic. Although Lil Cinders is 100% a downgrade from the name Lava Bubbles. Regardless, what even makes Mario Super? It might seem like a really dumb question, but Mario hasn't always had that title. Some of the first games he's in, there's no mention of the word, and then in 1985, he's all of a sudden upgraded to the Super title. To answer this question, we have to compare the games that are Super and the games that aren't. Mario Bros, Mario Kart, and Donkey Kong all have Mario repeating the same level with slight variations in gameplay each time. Some don't even have any changes each time you replay the levels. On the other hand, Galaxy, Sunshine, and 64 all have Mario taking on adventures that are continually pushing forward. Every area is new and exciting, with an overarching goal Mario is working towards, and that's just it. What makes Mario Super is the setting he's put in. If Mario is taking part in a Sisyphean task, he's just a humble mortal. But if he's rescuing Princess Peach across 8 or more worlds, he's given the Super mantra. So it really should be Mario Super Galaxy. No wait, I hate that. But it would answer the question. Yoshi's power-ups are peak, more specifically the Dash Pepper. This power-up is pretty interesting as its functions resemble Yoshi's base movement. Both Yoshi and the Dash Pepper have fundamental movement that has some niche uses but is overall a side grade, and advanced techniques that make them amazing. That advanced movement is the ability to turn Yoshi into a missile. There are multiple different ways of doing that, but essentially due to some weird quirk with a power-up, Mario can be launched into the stratosphere if you jump at just the right time. Yet again, I am really bad at this game, so I can't do this on my own, but speedrunners use it to fly past critical parts of Hightail Falls and nothing else. Yeah, this strategy only really works in Hightail Falls. It's a shame too, because having something quick like this would really be cool if you could use it in other levels. Similarly to how every level Yoshi is in, speedrunners find a way to use him to skip massive portions of the level, but still. The inhabitants of Good Egg Galaxy really do set the tone for, wait, I think I've seen this guy before. This character design that I'll coin the pea shooter motif is present across every single game genre in history. Legend of Zelda, Mario, and even oddballs like Q*bert work off of this design. So why is this so abundant in video games? For starters, most of these characters have some form of projectile they employ, and we do too. The ranged weapons of the real world are very lethal, which is good for a hunter-gatherer trying to catch an animal, but isn't great for an introductory enemy in a platformer. You need these characters to be dumbed down so your player can get adjusted to your game. Whereas a lot of modern weapons are lethal and made of metal, you can decrease the imposingness of the weapon by smoothing out the edges and making it a part of a living creature. This subtly communicates a lack of hostility in the design, whereas robotic enemies in video games have the exact opposite effect. Or you can just design a character around this because it looks funny. But this is a pretty good case of how it's bulky, it's janky, it's hideous. The Nintendo 64 controller has long been called out for being one of the strangest controllers in video game history, but I do think some of this comes from a place of misunderstanding. This controller is very overwhelming when you just take a look at it, but when you actually use it a lot, the pieces start to fall into place. Games like Smash 64 and Mario just have you relegate your hands to the middle and right handles, and having played a lot of Smash 64, I can say I'm a pretty big fan of this control scheme. You only ever really need to move your hands to the other arrows on the left-hand side a couple of times when playing. I mean, people really treat it like you have to break your wrist to take a picture in Pokemon Snap, but this doesn't absolve this controller from everything. The joystick has the structural integrity of a house, made of cards. And there are some exceptions where you actually have to pack up your bags and drive a mile across the controller to reach the left trigger button. Still, that doesn't change the fact that Super Mario Galaxy did the crabs right. A lot of crab representation in Mario games has been lacking to say the least. The sidesteppers in the original Mario Bros. Are just slightly harder to knock out Koopas, and the crabs in Koopa Troopa Beach are annoying at best, so when the crabbers came around in Super Mario Galaxy, I was pleasantly surprised. Fighting mechanics that are actually enjoyable and require forethought are a massive upgrade. The crabbers' tendency to move in random but often tactically significant directions when fighting Mario make every fight feel unique. These aren't enemies that you can just knock out and move along. You have to stop and handle them before carrying on with your adventure, and when you do take time to battle with them, you're rewarded with an interesting and complex chess game. I do especially appreciate when you have to use Boulder Mario to take all of the crabbers out when they're scattering around the planetoid. Gameplay like this really gives you the idea that, what's the first thing you see in Bob-omb Battlefield in Super Mario 64? Besides the Goombas, Bob-ombs, platforms, bubbles, Koopas, it's the Chain Chomp, okay? This enemy's signature peg attached to a chain is notably missing from Super Mario Galaxy, where he is relegated to a slightly better Ruby Rock. So why is the Chain Chomp missing the chain in Galaxy? The areas Chain Chomp inhabits in every Mario games are uniformly flat throughout, allowing the beast to jump in a straight line. Compare this to attacking in a line on a sphere, and you can see the problem. For the Chain Chomp to function the same way he does in the normal Mario games, he would have to go from jumping half a meter to jumping root 2/2 meters forward, which is pretty hard to make work, especially for what is essentially a dog so dumb he can't comprehend that he's limited to a set radius. So instead, he is afforded perfect spherical comprehension, where the Chain Chomp can comfortably remain the same distance from the center planetoid at all times. Well, at least they keep the barking in it, but it does bring up the question. The piranha plant is a staple of the Mario series. Every game has some take on the red and white vegetable. It's impossible to play a Mario game and miss it. Hell, this guy even made it into Smash Bros. But what about the unloved, ugly cousin to the piranha plant? I'm talking about the Chomper from Plants vs. Zombies. Most people seem to get the idea that this guy is completely useless, and I think that he can be useless if you use him incorrectly. At face value, Chomper is a plant that can KO one zombie and takes an eon to recover from it, so that makes the Chomper horrible at holding down the fort. But that's just the problem. No disposable plant is used like this. You wouldn't make the backbone of your defense potato mine, so you shouldn't treat Chompers the same way either. The Chomper has the facade of being a non-instant plant, despite the fact that he's clearly geared towards being a disposable plant. The high cost is made to reward players who build up way more sun than they need, and the Chomper rewards these players with a very quick recharge. This is why speedrunners use a ton of them, because they're super quick and can easily activate the 50% rule. But that doesn't change the fact that the status quo for bosses in the new Super Mario Bros. Series is redundancy. Every castle you enter has you either fighting off the same boss you've already ran into 7 worlds before, or have you face off against clones of Bowser Jr. that don't change at all. But it wasn't always like this, especially in new Super Mario Bros. For the DS. Yes, you rebattle a few bosses here and there, but a lot of the bosses here are pretty new and refreshing. Mummy Pokey, Cheap Skipper, and Monty Tank are way more memorable than any of the Koopaling fights could hope to be. I'd go as far as to say that some of these are on par with the 3D Mario bosses. It's surprising that this is one of the few times in the new Super Mario Bros. Games the games are truly new. Incorporating bosses that are a mold of common enemies was definitely a risk for an end-of-the-world boss battle, but I think it more than paid off. I remember some of these fights more than I remember fighting Bowser himself. It almost makes me question if, can we make a poorly designed enemy? I'm talking about taking everything good about the Koopas and making it bad. I'm saying we flip the entirety of Mario on its head, or maybe just the first letter in Mario. Wario's world has some pretty horrible enemy design, but the specific reasons why these designs fail are pretty odd. Take the Magon, for example. The bulging eyes and the drunken stroll don't even invoke any feelings of hostility. Most enemies in the Mario franchise stare at you with frustration and anger, making you feel ready to dropkick them across the stage. An issue I also didn't think would be a problem for me is the texture of these enemies. They look more like plastic army men than anything that would be an actual threat. It's so bad that I think the Goombas from Mario 64 have more texture than these guys do. All of these attributes add up to me not seeing these characters as enemies. They feel more like people who can't understand that the right lane is the slow lane for cars. So in the end, we can answer the question. Mario is really weird. A plumber traveling through deserts, tundras, and 20 other insane settings to rescue a princess who was kidnapped by a giant turtle. A plot like this is a little too out there for a Saturday morning cartoon, but I wouldn't really say any of these games play into the humorously over-the-top setting. Galaxy, Odyssey, and even 64 set most of the games up to be stricken clean of a lot of jokes. If humor is in one of these games, it's more of the kind that only a character in their desired universe finds funny. This focus really did set the status quo for most Mario games, except for this one. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door just has amazing writing in general, but as a result of the great writing, The Thousand-Year Door is nothing short of funny as hell. It isn't afraid to get a little risky with its jokes, and they pay off immensely. They make jokes about suggestive character design, self-awareness, and everything in between. You'll be talking to a character and all of a sudden be hit with a bit of humor and a final boss fight. But I think the humor does not distract from the story in this game. This game is theatrical in its presentation, so having dialogue that reflects this larger-than-life presentation perfectly wafts the humor into this story soup. It serves as a constant reminder that Rainbow Road has a cushy spot in every single Mario Kart game. Across 11 Mario Kart games, Rainbow Road hasn't missed any releases. But why is this track so synonymous with Mario Kart as a whole? If we take a look back to Super Mario Kart and play through the dozen tracks in this game, we can see the insanely prevalent lack of originality in these tracks. To the game's credit, a lot of these levels are this way to save on storage space, but to someone who's playing this game, it will still feel repetitive no matter how lenient you are to the game's developers. So you go through the same 4 tracks repeated across 19 levels, and in the final track you see this, an interstellar mix of the craziest hazards, colors, and turns you've seen in this game. A track that has the title of the hardest level in the game filled with the hardest levels. It's no wonder why this track is across all of the Mario games. It's the only track with an identity of its own. It really shines some light on why. The Fire Flower feels amazing to control. For keeping Mario out of harm's way for giant chunks of the level, you're rewarded with a power-up that can easily clear any enemies in your path. So the Ice Flower should act pretty similarly, right? No. I should make it clear that both are equally usable, and the Ice Flower is probably better than the Fire Flower in most use cases. But more often than not, the Ice Flower feels way worse to use than the Fire Flower, and I think it has to do with the instantaneous power of the Fire Flower. With the Ice Flower, you have to hit an enemy with an ice ball, pick them up, and then throw them again, and you have to do all of this within a very short period of time. Compare this with a Fire Flower, where all you have to do is toss a fireball and that's it for your foes. It really makes me question, what's the point in having a power-up if you have to put more effort into destroying your enemies? Are you truly given godly powers if you have to kneel to all the enemies in your path to use the powers? The Ice Flower is technically better, but ergonomically worse than the Fire Flower, which is exactly why. Fizzlet is definitely a respectable Mario enemy. A lot of the characters I analyze are all over the Mario franchise, but Fizzlet is pretty content just being in 1 or 2 levels. So content that he gained a couple of pounds between Super Mario Galaxy 2 and Super Mario 3D World? Why did such a small character need a redesign? Looking at both iterations of the character, you can pretty easily tell that Fizzlet from Mario Galaxy has a sinister air to him. On the other hand, the modern Fizzlet in Super Mario 3D World is completely chopped. His larger figure and slight frown give off a lack of spontaneity. It's the difference between the boxy NES hull and the smooth body of a PS5, and the designs play into how both enemies behave. The Fizzlet from 3D World sticks to its same path, and the Fizzlet from Galaxy jumps around in an unpredictable pattern. The 3D World Fizzlet sticks to the easy-to-comprehend quadrilateral, while the old Fizzlet utilizes the infinitely complex circle. I can definitely say in Galaxy 2, it's no secret at this point that I don't think the Koopalings are all that great. At their best, they're surfaceable, and at their worst, they are just straight up forgettable. But the modern Koopalings are phenomenal when compared to their debut. While I'd overall say that Super Mario Bros. 3 is way better than the modern new Super Mario Bros. Series, the Koopalings in this game were completely forgettable. Their differences in the third game boil down to what type of magic do I shoot, leaving them to having more in common with Boom Boom. And I don't think I have to say this, but Boom Boom is a horrible boss. I will say that the levels that lead up to the Koopaling fights are leagues better in Mario 3, and I think it's really a shame that so much buildup was put towards so much disappointment, so in the end you really see why. Mario Kart is a horribly controlled, slippery nightmare of a game that is unforgiving and unbalanced, is exactly what people would be saying today if it weren't for Mario Kart 64. While Super Mario Kart is undoubtedly the title that got the Mario Kart franchise off the ground, there's no denying that this title is just horrible. The turning, drifting, and even moving forward just don't feel like a car. Like, I never think that a racing game would mess up the racing. And this game being horrible leads to the Mario Kart series beginning being very blurry. Like, Super Mario Bros. Is an all-time classic thought to be one of the best games of all time, and you can go back and play this game anytime and enjoy yourself. But Super Mario Kart is never fun to return to, so this game really has more in common with the original Mario Bros. Unfun, slippery, and outdone by its remakes. I mean, at least it isn't the case that, if you watch the announcement trailer to Super Mario Galaxy 2, you will probably notice how dull everything looks. Not just in comparison to Super Mario Galaxy 2's final release, but in comparison to the Mario series as a whole. Even though Galaxy 1 sticks to a darker color palette, the colors are still vibrant across the entire game. The interstellar blues of the skyline stick out as a whole, and contribute to the game feeling extremely unique. That's not even mentioning Galaxy 2, which is a perfect blend of screaming colored cyan skyboxes with neon landscapes. So why did the prototype of Galaxy 2 have such a mellowed color palette? Well, I hate to be like this, but I think it's pretty likely that the developers were still ironing out the lighting for this game, and it just ended up making it into the trailer. But the colors in this game are still interesting, and I think they'd be suited for a hidden level or spin-off game, but that's more than likely the reason why. Did you know that Mario Galaxy has a hidden power-up? The Bones Curse is stretching the definition of power-up, as Mario is turned into one of those skeletons at the end of Boo's Boneyard Galaxy. In this state, Mario is completely immune to damage, but still reacts to damage sources as if he was hit. Take running into Goombas for an example. Mario would fall backwards but not take any damage. On top of this, when Mario falls back, he falls apart and takes much longer to get back up, turning this power-up into a balancing act. And despite the fact that I joked about this not really being a power-up, I think I prefer this to a lot of the power-ups already present throughout Mario Galaxy, because this one doesn't change Mario's movement in a way that makes it seem like it would be necessary for a level's completion. The Bones Curse doesn't impact Mario's movement significantly enough for me to think it'd be a required power-up. At very least, it would make for an interesting time trial or two, with you having to be more wary about taking damage as it could lead to your demise. Massive credit to Aurum on YouTube for discovering this, as they did a lot of the hard work in uncovering this lost power-up. Anyways, have you ever found a hidden area in a Mario level just to be rewarded with this? A 1-up, a mushroom, or just a bunch of coins feel completely insignificant in a playthrough of any Mario game, and yet Nintendo still added these hidden areas in every single Mario level. So why do these hidden areas feel so underwhelming? It has to do with the core gameplay loop of the 2D Mario games. Now, having a repetitive gameplay loop isn't inherently bad. Tetris is probably the best game of all time, and its gameplay has hardly changed in almost half a century. But for an adventure centered around a platformer, a repetitive gameplay loop can leave the game feeling, well, repetitive. If you're doing the same jumps and running into different flavors of the same enemy, it makes for a bad game experience that builds intrigue through new and interesting level design. And this problem is exemplified in the hidden areas of these 2D Mario games. For your assiduity towards finding these hidden areas, you are rewarded with more of the same, making the secret in these levels something that can be found everywhere else. These aren't level secrets, these are level knowns. And so I ask the question, every interaction with an enemy in a Mario game centers around your ability to destroy them. You see a Goomba, you jump on its head. You see the Koopa Troopa, you knock it into the other enemies. You see a giant papier-mâché dragon, you also jump on his head. The point is, the Mario games train your brain to pick between running away from your enemies or knocking them to the ground with some combination of moves. So when you run into this guy, a few heads start to turn. The sentry turret is pretty straightforward. You stand near him and he shoots electricity at you, but dealing with him is a lot harder. You can't use a spin attack or a jump attack to knock them out, because they're invincible. You don't get many invincible enemies in Mario games, so they stick out when they do show up. The closest thing I can think of to a truly invincible enemy is the Thwomp, but these guys are much more intertwined with the environment than the sentry beam is. When you run into the sentry beam, you feel like it's actually trying everything to zap you. This, combined with the invulnerability, makes the sentry beam a very odd character to fight, because you aren't given the choice between fight or flight. You have one option, and that is to run away from this guy. And realizing this makes you reflect on how deep in the files of Mario Galaxy lies this abomination of a plant. The Dragon Head Flower is a downright hideous enemy that stumped modders for ages as to why this thing existed. That was until they found out that the Dragon Head Flower's job is to launch Mario into the air when he's on top of the rolling ball. But why was the Dragon Head Flower removed from the game? He'd make for an interesting transition between areas in the rolling green galaxy, right? To that I say, what do you mean? This thing is so hideous that I'd be more afraid of it than a regular piranha plant. And this guy is supposed to be a friendly NPC? Nobody's going to see this thing staring them down and go, yeah, I'll willingly walk into that. To prove my point, before we knew this thing's interaction with the rolling ball, most people assumed it was an enemy. So you have a situation where the model completely contrasts the actual function of the plant. Oh, and as if it wasn't nightmare fuel enough, this thing has a vacuuming effect that drags Mario towards it. So no wonder.